So you're there? Like we can start this?
I'm here with Jason Marchant.
Hello.
Can you hear Glenn now?
Yeah, I can
okay?
hear. Yeah, I can hear. Okay, yeah, Glenn, you sound good.
All right.
That's because I have my wife's microphone.
All right. Welcome to the Modern Digital Enterprise, formerly Device Squad, the digital transformation podcast from Anexinet, part of the Anexinet Podcast Network.
As a leading technology consultancy and reseller, Anexinet helps clients provide a complete digital experience for customers, employees, and end users. We accomplish this through our holistic approach, which encompasses all aspects of today's digital journey, end-to-end. Anexinet partners with top technology vendors like HPE to offer products and services that enhance the digital experience across customer engagement, enterprise mobility, cloud and hybrid IT, and analytics. Because great digital experiences rely on the smooth operation of all interconnected elements. From strategy through execution, we deliver custom multi-channel applications, including web, mobile, chat, and voice. With self-service apps for customer loyalty and enterprise apps that streamline internal processes, now you can reimagine legacy applications to propel your business forward. Anexinet also helps you embrace modern cloud and hybrid IT infrastructure to provide a seamless experience at every touchpoint, empowering you to recover quickly from disaster, scale to meet demand, and automate systems for perfect performance 24/7. And to maximize your competitive advantage, we ensure you always deliver the best experience possible by continuously honing your digital solutions through data-driven insights. So, how do you know if your business has what it takes to provide the complete digital experience? One that sets you apart, maintains competitive edge, and turns users into passionate fans? Simple. Just give us a call. Together, we can deepen engagement and make every digital experience remarkable.
It's not the Digital Transformation Power Hour?
We are here today with Jason Marchant. Glenn Gruber, Senior Strategist, is also joining us today. Jason is here in the barn, folks.
Yes.
Very exciting. So I have to stay off the mute button, which also means I should probably swap out this chair. I think you could probably hear it. Let me get a less noisy chair.
Should I?
This is great.
I think you can start talking because...
Okay, I can go.
Yeah, I mean, it's nice that he's trying to, have a less squeaky chair to, not have problems during the podcast, but look at all this commotion he's making to get ready.
Before we do that, why don't I lead off? Oh, so uncomfortable. Why don't I lead off with a good chicken story that just happened this morning?
Oh, that's great. Yeah.
It was weird. I looked out. This one's a quick one. I looked outside and just happened to see two crows escorting a hawk, literally escorting a hawk past our yard. Like they were bouncers or something. Like, let's go, hawk.
Wow.
So apparently the crows, I don't know. I'm not sure if they're actually like protecting our chickens or if they're just protecting their own crow babies from hawks, which is what they do. But it was kind of cool to see that. And I think that might have some application to what we're going to be talking about.
Yeah, maybe. Yeah. I mean, so all of my notes are all about how to keep chickens healthy and safe from predators.
Perfect.
So I think this should tie in very nicely.
That's perfect.
Yeah.
We are here with Jason Marchant, security. Usually I write down a little bit of information about the person that I'm talking to, like their LinkedIn.
Well, you know what?
Years old.
Being sort of like a security
guy.
guy,
I want it up there.
I don't have a whole lot of information out there.
It says here you're an information security risk advisor.
Yeah, that's right.
Yeah.
Well, I mean, that's what I like to call myself. I am working for Takeda, which is a pharmaceutical company. Pharmaceutical. Yeah.
It's very good. So touching upon two things that we've been focusing on lately, security and pharmaceuticals and healthcare. So perfect.
And I have a lot of experience in healthcare. So
Excellent.
yeah.
So why don't you just tell us about your digital journey, man?
Oh, man.
You know, how did you get to where you are today? What got you interested in it? And yeah.
Yeah. So when I was a kid, my most favorite thing to do was play on actually, I had a Commodore 64. So, when a lot of my friends were getting their sweet Nintendos and things like this, like my parents came home with a Commodore 64, and I was like, great, what am I going to do with this? I pretty much had one game, which was a stupid game with a clown on a unicycle, and you would just ride the unicycle back and forth across the stream and like kick these balloons up in the air.
Oh yeah, what was that called? I remember that one.
I don't recall, but maybe if I heard it, I'd remember. But so anyway, so I got my start there on the Commodore 64. Slowly moved my way up into an 8080 with a yellow monochrome screen.
Uh-huh.
This is a story I tell in my classes sometimes. My dad basically said, hey, Jason, you can play anything on these floppy disks that has an EXE. So you go to a command prompt, you type dir, anything with an EXE you can play. I was like, all right, cool. So that went really well until I found a game called format.exe, which, for anyone that had to rebuild a computer back in those days, very fast. Yeah.
Run it.
Yeah.
Well,
wow.
And you only get to play it once.
Yeah.
Basically.
Yeah. But I won.
It's like one OK button, and then you win.
Right. It was like, are you really sure you want to play this game? And I was like, yeah, I'm sure. I really want to play this. So yeah, needless to say, that's when I learned not to play format.exe, and that's also when I learned a lot of my curse words from my dad. So
I have a feeling there's a lot of cursing that goes on in the security world in general.
Yeah, we like it. We like it. It lets off steam.
And so from there,
I just found my way into the computer world.
Uh-huh.
I got my bachelor's in IT. I went on to get my master's degree in business, but a lot of certifications in IT and stuff like that. So,
and then how'd you wind up in pharma? Was that something you were particularly interested in, or? So
no, pharma was not necessarily one of the industries that I was going for. It just sort of worked out historically. So it was kind of funny because all my life I had worked in nonprofit organizations. And then, this pharmaceutical organization came to me and said, hey, would you like to work for us? And we'll actually pay you. So that's when I learned that the skills that I had actually had value and that I could, get paid for doing what I was doing.
So while we're talking about your origin stories, it kind of makes me think superhero wise. So what, we always hear a lot about hackers and white hat and black hat. So what made you decide to use your powers for good rather than evil? Like you could have made more money that way than, or God forbid, working gratis for non-for-profits.
Yeah, wow, that's a great question. I'm not really sure. I think it was probably fear that steered me, down the good path.
Sure.
Yeah.
Also, Jason is from the Midwest.
Yes.
And I think that's just a general tendency.
Okay, so you're just a nice person, like de facto, yeah.
I mean, that's what people tell me. I don't know.
But I see on your LinkedIn page just a lot of healthcare experience.
Yeah.
System specialist at Focused Health Solutions, chief information security officer at Mass General.
Yep.
That's a big deal. enterprise cybersecurity risk officer at Partners Healthcare. And you also teach at Northeastern.
And
Did you teach at DuPage? Or
I did, yeah. And I spent a little bit of time at the Department of Veterans Affairs too.
But in terms of the medical specialty, did you just kind of fall into that and then you kind of got good?
Yeah. I just kind of fell into it. And all of my career sort of after that sort of fell the same way. It wasn't necessarily a career goal that I had, but it just happened.
I mean, from what I know, it seems like the healthcare field, for one, is sort of like troubled by difficulty keeping up with the latest technology. They're kind of a giant ship that has trouble, navigating. And two, but at the same time, they have so much additional regulatory concerns to worry about.
Yeah, they do.
Compliance and everything that goes with that.
Yeah, it's an interesting field. The healthcare industry is, I think, kind of lagging behind other verticals, like the financial sector, very highly regulated, but I think you also have a lot of money going through that vertical. So I think they've been more inclined to use that money to make sure that they're in compliance and have security best practices enabled. They have more disposable income perhaps at their fingertips than maybe perhaps a nonprofit hospital has.
Are you excited by that additional challenge? Was that part of what you liked about it, or?
Yeah, I did really like it. It was interesting because I got to, I think it really helped me understand the information security field more. And I had to really understand risk. It wasn't good enough for me to go to, let's say, a researcher or a physician or someone like that and say, hey, we have to do this because HIPAA says so. Right? I had to go and say, if we don't do this, it could disclose patient information and, the results of that could be this. And let's look at how many patients you have in your system and let's try and quantify that a little bit. Let's try and look at how someone might come in and attack this system or how maybe a malicious insider might take data out or something like that.
So how does that differ, though, if you're not looking at it from the regulation down and you're looking at it from the bottom up? I mean, how does that really differ than being a CISO or being in charge of security for any really large corporation? I mean, so many companies have they have customers, they have PII data and the like. Health data may be a little bit more of a concern than someone's credit card number, but like what's like really different in how you looked at what those risk factors are or threat vectors?
Well, when I think about like the threat vectors, it forced me to really understand the technical ways that threat actors were trying to get at data and explain that people are more likely to be targeted. Not that, I have to be careful walking a fine line between sort of scaring people with bringing up sort of these conspiracy theory related topics or what people might perceive to be conspiracy theory and what the real world is. I think the real world is that we're seeing right now is that threat actors are truly targeting individuals. So one of the things I learned very early on is people don't really respond well, I don't think, to information security related risk or cyber risk or whatever you want to talk about it. I think there's a perception really that the IT people go out and they do their thing somewhere in the server room or something, and they just protect everyone and they fix everything. Nobody really cares what they do. They just kind of go along their day and assume it's all being done. So I learned very early on that people don't really care a whole lot about what I say. So it made especially healthcare really a challenge, because you can't go at them with the stick and say, if you don't do this, there's going to be a fine or a penalty. There's HIPAA, but we haven't really seen huge fines like maybe we've seen in other verticals. So what I had to really do was get to know each business line. So when I was in healthcare, I had to know the ins and outs of what that practice was doing, how they were working, what technology they were using, what kind of data they were handling, and the intricate details of some of their business processes, so that I could speak to them on their level about how some sort of information security risk might affect them. Something that goes beyond just installing an antivirus client on a laptop or making sure their password is 8 characters or whatever it is.
Yeah, no, I mean, it's often a big challenge to get people to kind of get serious about it. And it's definitely interesting to see different ways to make that connection for people. Like, and you talk about like people just think that the security folks just take care of it and they don't have to worry about it. But it's still like amazing to me that, the social engineering stuff works as often as it still does. Maybe I give people too much credit that they should not do these dumb things anymore. But that's where kind of like, the rubber meets the road with a lot of people.
Yeah, I thought that too. It's amazing how many phishing emails are still being used and how many people still sort of click the link. But I also have to say that I think the threat actors are also becoming more sophisticated in how they present those links. It's not as straight up as what we've seen in the past. And there could oftentimes be several steps that the attacker is using to get the information they need. So they might send you an email saying, "Hey, your bank account just fell below your minimum balance or something. Click here to log into the site." And the email will look just like, let's say, a Bank of America website. And then so you click on that link and you go to the website, and the website, of course, says enter your username and password. So people will then log in, but what they don't realize is they've just handed over their username and password. They're not actually logging into the real website.
Sure.
I think that's consistent with what you're saying about the fact that you had trouble selling your services, or even, just selling the need for security at work, because people just aren't, they're just probably, I would guess, overwhelmed just by the idea. They don't know anything about security, and so they're just willing to let you do whatever it is you feel you need to do. They trust your expertise. And so I think the same thing happens with phishing emails, and the reason that they're still effective is that people are just willing to assume that there's something that they need to correct. What I think is funny is, like, I get a lot of phishing emails like everybody else, but I think it's funny that these guys can like go and construct a mock BOA login website, but that looks pretty real, but they still can't figure out how to put together a grammatically correct sentence in English in the email that asks you. So that's the thing that always gets them.
Yep.
In the emails that I've gotten is that there's just typos or a couple of bad words that, I think that's thank God they don't have a good grasp of English.
Yeah.
Well, thank God you're a writer.
Then we're all done for.
Yeah. But I mean, it's also, Steve, because you're like a writer. Like, it's you actually have command of the English language. You think about how many other people who work, maybe are not at the same level that you are.
Yeah.
And that stuff gets right past them. So
other people, not have way, I guess.
Yeah.
There's a reference for you, Glenn. What's that from? Oh, not have way. That is from Steve Martin. Stand up. I think it might be the Let's Get Small album. Okay.
Wow. That sounds super deep. So what are the things that you have done to not only understand maybe what unique challenges there might be for their business line, but to impress on them the importance and also point out all the times that maybe they're screwing up so that they start to recognize that maybe the behavior needs to change.
Yeah, good question. So I think the most effective tool I've been able to leverage is building a relationship of trust with the person, with the department. I know it seems kind of small or trivial, but delivering something very small to them and kind of starting off slow. There are a number of times where people will email me. And if they're in the business divisions, I always make sure I email them back almost instantaneously. I just want them to see that I'm actually there. Even though I'm an IT person, maybe I'm not someone who, it's not like a black hole, right? They can almost converse with me in an email or an IM, or we'll just pick up the phone and chat. And then if I can deliver something small. So one of the things I've done is our team, actually, we've created something called a Security Scorecard. And what that is we'll talk with some sort of division lead, and we'll understand what kind of data they're handling, what maybe their key systems are, and we'll do an assessment behind the scenes. And then we'll turn over this sort of one slide presentation, very aesthetically pleasing, and it shows them the score of their department. And that's a way that we've been able to sort of impress upon them, hey, here's some things that we can offer for you. Here's some services. It requires minimal time from you. We can do all of our work on the back end, and then we can talk about it afterwards. And from there, you start sort of establishing this little relationship based on trust, based on actionable information. We're not turning over something that says, oh, you don't have this policy in place. It's something more tangible that they can actually use. Like, for example, here's some actual servers that we found with your data on it that you guys use that is not patched. And we're now working with those IT teams to help get them patched.
Okay, so you're actually going through and just like assessing all the systems that are within their control or purview, and coming back with, here's what we found and things that you can do to remediate that.
Yes. And, where we can, we're able to step in and sort of initiate some of those actions to help drive the implementation of those treatment plans or remediation plans or whatever you want to call them, to fix the problem. Otherwise, we'll hand it over to the business and say, this is something that we need you to do, but we're there to support you and things like that.
Okay. Yeah, because when you talked about the scorecard, I thought that you might have gone in two different directions. One you kind of hinted towards, which is governance, which is if you have this kind of data, then you have to follow these rules, from a policy perspective, to make sure that that data is properly secured. Like we do something at Anexinet, kind of similar when we're looking at mobile security. We put together what we call a policy characteristics matrix, which looks at, based on the data asset and the sensitivity of that data, try and map out, here's the type of policies that you, and the user, here's the type of policies that you need to apply to make sure that that's properly secured.
Yeah, that's really cool. That's actually one of the things we've actually just implemented as well. So we have what we're calling scenario-based control requirements internally. Not that means too much to sort of outside of our team, but basically when someone comes to us and says, hey, we want to build this system and it's going to be in the cloud and we're going to have mobile devices attaching to it, and we're going to build our own custom app that's going to sit out in Amazon that's going to collect this data of patients taking our therapies, then we can say, all right, well, knowing that, here's the controls that we would want you to build into this system. And we can help guide you through it. It's one of those things where, like two-factor authentication, for example, very common today. It's almost become sort of a norm. Yeah, which is great, is great. But there's a lot of different ways that you can accomplish two-factor authentication. It doesn't have to be the code sent to your mobile phone, for example. So we'll say something, oh, well, this is a cloud system, so we want to make sure that there's two-factor authentication on here. But let's work together to figure out how two-factor authentication, or maybe we should call it multi-factor authentication, is best implemented in your business process.
Okay, so it's actually, well, you actually just hit on a little hot button for me, which is SMS's two-factor authentication, which I don't think that anyone should be doing anymore, since SMS is kind of fundamentally not very secure, easily intercepted. And I think that even NIST has said that that should not be utilized going forward. But are there times where maybe you start to have that conversation of, yes, we need to do two-factor or multi-factor, but instead of SMS, we're going to use hardware tokens or something like that?
Absolutely. Yeah. It's really, I think you kind of brought up earlier, it's sort of dependent on the data classification. A lot of companies consider different types of data sensitive. It's interesting. So when I was in the healthcare field, we had, patient information being the most sensitive information. And when I've worked outside of healthcare, if we were dealing with patient information, it was still a highly classified piece of data, but it was not the highest classification. So it was kind of interesting how we would discern between what a company's most sensitive data is versus something that most people would probably say, like patient information, is the most sensitive. I guess what I'm trying to say is it was interesting to see how different companies would still take it seriously, right? Still protect it and still want to protect it, but they wouldn't classify it as high as maybe a healthcare company did.
That's really interesting because it gets you to start to think differently about, am I securing things based on what's important to me versus, and this is where regulation often comes in, where there is a standard of, if you have this kind of information, I don't care how important you think it is, you are going to do a minimum level of security protocols around that information. So it's kind of interesting that you're saying that even within different parts of healthcare, that like I kind of had in my head, not being a healthcare expert by any stretch of the imagination, that HIPAA and other regulations like that kind of set those standards for everyone who's kind of in the field. But it seems like maybe that's not exactly the case.
Right? That they would be universal.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah. So that's a good point. So when you go to a hospital and you give the hospital your health information, they're required to protect it under HIPAA. If your health information gets to Facebook, that is not protected under HIPAA. Well, I shouldn't say that. I shouldn't give legal advice here. I don't know, right? But it's not the same. But it's the same information, but it may not be protected under HIPAA.
I mean,
but go ahead, Steve.
Are you just talking about if somebody willingly puts their own information up on Facebook or some other?
Yeah, it gets tricky. So it gets tricky. How might Facebook have gotten the information? Not necessarily talking about information. Well, yeah. Even if I go out and willingly post my health information out there, Facebook may not be obligated to protect that as a hospital would.
Well, yeah, I mean, I think that there's different. I mean, it's almost like standards of care. That you have to look at, because if someone posts their personal health information on Facebook, there's two things in my mind. One, there is, stupid is as stupid does, and therefore, all bets should be off. But then you would otherwise be pre-imposing a duty for Facebook to say, hey, this information looks like it's healthcare information, and then validating that and then imposing a rule as part of, to protect it in that way.
Yeah.
Which seems like a lot, it's funny. I'm saying, as I'm saying this out loud, I'm like, oh, this seems like a lot to put on a company like Facebook, but we are asking almost the same things when it comes to Facebook and YouTube and other social platforms, when it comes to
hate speech,
hate speech and all this other stuff,
propaganda.
So I guess maybe it's screw it, let Facebook do their job. Figure this out.
HIPAA.
I've changed my mind as I've talked.
HIPAA was written only for 3 different classifications of organizations. One was a covered entity, which basically meant a hospital or a physician, some sort of healthcare provider. And then you also have a clearinghouse. So this would be some organization that would hold mass amounts of health information and process it. And then I think the third one, if I recall, was maybe insurance companies.
So kind of maybe stepping back a little bit to, we started to talk a little bit about threat vectors. There's definitely a lot of move towards the cloud. A lot of companies who are highly regulated are often, have a lot of trepidation about moving to the cloud, but it's definitely a direction that I think most people are going in regardless. What are things from a, what should people know about security? What can we do to sort of ameliorate those concerns and get them to think differently? Because, once you're using cloud or just, more of a services-based organization where you're going to be sharing information across different, there's a lot of different actors, that have to participate in healthcare. What are the things that we can do from a security perspective to be more comfortable with that move and also be more secure? Because I don't think that you're fundamentally less secure. In some cases, you may be more secure by going to the cloud, where someone like Amazon or Microsoft is paying attention, versus your own data center, where it's up to the 3 people, in the network room to cover all that for you.
Yeah, that's a really good question. So I like to, what I would do is I would say it relies on 3 things, and not really to get too theoretical into information security, but I guess I will.
Do it.
So information security is primarily concerned with 3 things, and that is confidentiality, integrity, and availability. And then they also throw in this sometimes why thing on what's called non-repudiation. So let me just talk a little bit about what those 3 things are. Obviously, confidentiality is someone seeing something that they shouldn't have seen. Integrity is making sure that data is accurate. Availability is making sure that data is there when you need it. And then non-repudiation means that if I do go in and change the data or send the data or something like that, that it actually came from me. There's no way to refute that I was somebody else.
Right.
So those that's how I would look at this. And when I think about the adoption of cloud now, I think there's tons of benefits that you were just talking about. And that's a huge driver for people to go out in the cloud. And I think using the cloud sometimes is appropriate, and sometimes it might not be appropriate. And the cases really all depend on what is your tolerance for confidentiality, integrity, and availability, and any deterioration of those. If you have some tolerance for someone seeing your data that shouldn't have, then that might be a use case to go in the cloud. If it's okay that data might get changed, that might be okay. If it's okay that it might not be available when you need it, then that might be okay. And I think historically, what we've tried to do in our organizations is we've said, well, we have zero tolerance for those things. So we want to keep them all in-house in our four-wall data center. And we're going to spend a lot of money to maintain a facility that has all of our servers. We're going to have a backup location, right? And that's how we're going to ensure that stuff stays private, accurate, and available. And now when we go into the cloud, we lose that control. So as long as the organization is okay with losing some level of control on those three fronts, then I think cloud is our option. If they're not okay, and let's say there's a big cost driver for going out in the cloud, then what we want to do is we want to build in controls or architecture or deploy technology so that we lessen the likelihood or we lessen the impact if one of those three things gets compromised.
So when you say lose control by going to the cloud? Yeah. I mean, what specifically are you talking about? Because yes, they're not my servers. I don't deploy them manually. I don't have to go buy them and all that other stuff. But there's as much opportunity for things to go wrong in that way when it's in your control. Like I'm trying to understand like what that means to you.
So the first real control that you would want to implement is physical access. Right? If you have physical access to the server with the data on it, then you own the data. There's not really too much you can do to prevent that from happening. So that's sort of the first thing that you surrender, and it's kind of a big one. When I have my data on a server in the cloud, all we're really saying is that my data is now on somebody else's machine. And they can have an audit. They can have, a SOC 2 written up by a Big Four consulting company. But you can't ever really be sure that a malicious person inside the company will go in and attach a console cable to a router.
Or a consultant from outside the company.
Or a consultant, yeah. They get access to the server room. Maybe they're posing again. So I'm going down the line of conspiracy theory here.
That's fine.
But if I'm a server delivery person, right? I have to drop off this new server that they just ordered to Google in their data center, right? If they don't have physical controls around the delivery of that server, it might allow me access to, as I'm dropping the box down, to switch a cable or plug in a USB with a keylogger on a server or something like that. It definitely speaks to some of that X-Files type level of
anxiety.
Yeah.
But we'll get to X-Files in a minute. I've got something for you on that one. But.
All right, cool. But that it could happen. I mean, that could happen. And what we might want to do is talk about the likelihood of it happening, but certainly the impact could be pretty significant.
When you talked about the confidentiality and whether cloud or not, one of the things that I'm seeing, or at least I'm reading about, I shouldn't say seeing because I'm not, in this directly, is the use of kind of data masking techniques. Yeah, everything from just kind of simple hashes, all the way up through differential privacy, techniques to, even if you were able to see the data and you intercepted the data in one way, shape, or form, you still wouldn't know what it was.
Right.
So is that something that, I'm not just reading about, but is actually happening? And can you speak to that a little bit?
Yeah, it's really becoming a concern with this whole idea of more powerful hardware with quantum computing, large clusters. This whole idea is becoming more of a topic. When AES encryption was developed, we operated under the assumption that this was a good encryption algorithm that would last us a while, but the likelihood that someone would be able to get data that was encrypted with AES and decrypt it within the time that that data was usable was probably unlikely. Now we're starting to approach a period of time where maybe that's not true anymore. Maybe someone with the use of quantum computing, really large clusters, really powerful hardware, might be able to decrypt data in a faster time. So that's what encryption is all about. We always want to make sure that that data stays encrypted for the amount of time that it's usable. We don't really care after that, or the sensitivity, I should say, is lessened over time. And so the impact of something that was encrypted that got decrypted would lessen. But
that's interesting. We often hear about how quantum computing will be used to create far greater security than we have. But I don't think I've heard anybody ever mention that quantum computing could also be used for evil. Maybe it's just because of the exclusivity of the technology, and I would assume that only the military is going to have it.
Yeah, exactly. So what we're likely to see is nation-state sponsored activities, stuff more like we've seen countries who were launching a ground war against another country start with a cyber war. So they would conduct some sort of attack on that country's electronic infrastructure first, and then invade on foot. And then what we're seeing is that invasion is a lot more powerful.
What do you think is the greatest threat to the average corporation right now? Is it the threat from other nations? I mean, is that becoming more and more of a factor? Are we talking about that even being more of a threat than, the lone hacker in his basement?
So I think the big crown jewel that everyone is after right now is either money or information that leads to money. So we look at the prevalence of ransomware that has come through. When hackers or what we more appropriately call attackers today, when attackers sort of first started, it was all about defacing a web page, right? There's this great story about how the ESPN website got hacked, and every time someone would click on the page, it would like bring up some picture of like a unicorn or a rainbow or something like that. I love that story. That doesn't necessarily carry the same impact today that it did then. It's funny, but it would certainly make a headline, but it almost might qualify as publicity for ESPN today rather than something that impacted their reputation.
Because we would assume that the more important things were all protected, and it would just seem kitschy.
Yeah, exactly. We'd all kind of laugh at it, and ESPN would go restore their websites, and we'd all be, looking up our sports scores again. But now what we're seeing is these these threat actors moving more towards directly getting into money. So we're seeing more threats in people in your finance organization, people who maybe are in like the accounts payable department, people who are monitoring emails, looking for emails that say, hey, your company needs to pay us. And then, they'll look for some big payday and then they'll reroute the money to a different bank account or something. And then, I don't want to go into details about how people do that. I don't necessarily want to train people listening, but, there's ways to do that without being tracked. And there are tools that can be used to do it. And it could make it pretty undetectable.
Well, I'm sure there's already a YouTube video out there for someone if they want,
right,
exactly.
Exactly.
They want to learn that. But actually, so now I want to go back Fox Mulderish here, and bring this back to this concept that is gaining a little bit more prevalence these days, and I think the example you gave is a good one for it, which is about zero trust. So, for those who don't know, a zero trust framework is basically where it's a concept centered on the belief that organizations should not automatically trust anything inside or outside its perimeters. So you have to verify pretty much everything. You don't trust anyone or anybody, even including those, accounts payable, clerks that you're referencing before granting access to something. So it's, kind of very conspiracy theory oriented, which is why I was, kind of made that Fox Mulder connection. But based on what you talked about, it sounds like this is a necessary thing. Like, is this something that you think is a good direction or a direction that will continue, or just kind of the flavor of the day?
It's definitely a concept of value. In my day, when I was just a little twinkle in my mom's eye, we called this trust but verify. So if a company said, yeah, we're protecting your data, we wouldn't say, oh, okay, thanks. We would say, okay, well, how are you protecting it? And let's dig a little bit deeper. This whole idea of zero trust, I think is certainly one of value. But it might not be valuable to the masses. This might be something more needed at higher data classification levels. So, as many of these frameworks and best practices are out there, it's just that it's an idea. And it's a tool that someone or a company can use to protect their data, but it doesn't necessarily mean that they have to. It's all based on risk. If the data that they have isn't worth the administrative effort of implementing a framework of zero trust and all the governance that might go along behind the scenes, then we're looking at a situation where the company is going to spend more money than they'll lose if they didn't. And that's kind of a hard concept to think about, right? When we go back to this idea of patient information, at the end of the day, a hospital is still a business that needs to make money. And that piece of patient information, although it still needs to be protected, the business still needs to be able to operate. And if they wind up spending more money to protect the information than they would if they had just lost it, then they haven't implemented great risk management practices and haven't adopted a great risk management strategy. So it's really difficult to think in those terms, I think, sometimes. And I think that's part of the challenge in risk. If we go back to HIPAA, the fines that we have seen have been $1 million, $2 million, $3 million along that level. Now, that might not impact the bottom line of a large hospital.
No, that's cost of doing business. I would pay that, every day and 3 times on Sunday.
Right.
To save the money. So,
yeah. So I kind of look at zero trust a lot like this. It's a good idea, and it's something that a business or perhaps even an individual should consider. But they have to think about the risk versus reward.
Do you want to just touch on the impact of AI? I'm curious as to whether you've implemented any AI at your workplace.
Yeah, because we're legally obligated to talk about AI on a tech podcast. So
nice. So I love AI. I have these ideas of grandeur about AI, and if you talk to my boss and my other teammates about how I envision this AI world of risk management, I'm really excited. We haven't gotten there yet, but I'm hoping to be there someday. But yeah, AI is interesting. I might almost default to one of your previous podcasts where you talked about, I think, face recognition for this whole slot. So maybe at this point, when you've gotten, as a listener, if you've gotten to this point in the podcast and you haven't listened to the face recognition podcast, pause this one, go check out the face recognition, and then come back.
Well, thanks for promoting our other episodes. I appreciate it.
You're welcome. I love it. I love your episodes.
Yeah. So actually, that brings up a good question. Like, do you think, have you listened to all of them? No, I'm sorry. That's not the serious question.
I have, yeah, many times actually.
Okay. Excellent. But the serious question is, kind of gets to, this is happening a lot with AI, but does around privacy also, like, does there need to be like more of like an ombudsman, or like some people have like a chief ethics officer who looks at this kind of stuff, but is there more of especially within the healthcare area, to have someone who has that role, who looks at both the fiduciary duty to the organization, but as well as to the patients, to make those determinations, rather than have someone just look at, well, it's an extra $5, I'm not doing it.
Yep. This is like the quintessential information security discussion right here. So the typical place for information security is within the IT organization, and that's typically under the CIO. And oftentimes the CIOs are trained in keeping systems available, making sure that everyone's able to get to the data. We're on sort of the cutting edge of using our technology. If that's our corporate strategy, we're not falling behind. And so information security becomes sort of a direct conflict to that sometimes. And I only say that because we're talking about limited resources in the sense of dollars. The CIO often has only a limited amount of resources to both implement technology that makes employees' lives easier, more efficient, more effective, but then at the same time has to distribute funds to secure them. And if the security doesn't positively impact the efficiency, then it's hard to make that case that we should do it, especially when we consider if breach laws aren't necessarily putting out fines that make it worthwhile, if that makes sense. So there's a lot of conversation. Does information security really belong within an audit organization, or does it fall under some sort of ethics and compliance officer, or somewhere else in the organization? This debate has been going on for a long time, and I think there's positives and negatives to all of them, probably, which we don't have time to talk about, but maybe in a future podcast.
Absolutely. Part 2.
When you do come back for your next episode, we need to have you do like a David Letterman-esque top 10 reasons that you know that your security is at risk.
At risk.
Type of feature.
Nice.
All right, so get that ready now.
All right, I'm almost prepared if you want to
Okay.
do another hour and a half.
Yeah.
This has been great, and we can start wrapping up. A couple of things I think are really interesting is that I find a real corollary between the phishing emails and that the effectiveness of those is dependent upon the quality of the emails. And it seems like one of a great vulnerability is in third parties coming into your workplace, consultants and so forth coming in, and it's almost as if the quality of their presentation determines the effectiveness of their attack. I find it to be really interesting. And then how much responsibility you think social media should have in protecting our data. We started talking about this. We didn't get to where I think it should conclude is like, do you think that we need more regulations in that respect when it comes to social media? We need like a HIPAA to extend its reach out to social media, out to people unknowingly putting their own data out there when it shouldn't be out there. Whether it's in their newsfeed or in like a DM chat situation where they assume security that's maybe not there. Do we need more regulation around that?
That's a good question. I mean, when I think about the purpose of social media, I think it's really meant to connect people electronically. And so what that does is it allows people who are maybe even geographically isolated to be more connected to a broader world, which is great. That could really be a great thing for us. If we add regulations on there, I think they would have to be thoughtful enough that it truly addresses the risks that we're concerned about. The regulation is written in a way that it truly protects what it is we're worried about, and it doesn't inhibit or at least it minimizes what the benefit of the platform is. You don't want to take the server and bury it underground in a concrete case so no one can get your data, right? Because then you can't even use it yourself. That's not really effective. We need to be able to think of a way that we can do this. And I guess without going too political, I'm not confident that we can do that.
Right, but it does represent just another version of cloud data, right? And like you said,
yes,
we lose control. We don't have the data in our possession.
Yes. There definitely needs to be scrutiny of the cloud provider. I think that's important. And I think as an individual, if you're comfortable with how that cloud provider is protecting your data, then by all means. But if you have questions or concerns, then I would encourage you to ask those questions or not participate. Find something else.
I do want to make one, quick and very clear comment, which is that when we talk about that, consultants can be a cause of, like a security risk. I want to be very clear that not Anexinet consultants. If anyone from Anexinet comes in to work with you, they are very nice people. We're all very nice people. We're good. You don't have to worry about us. The other guys, I can't say.
Yeah,
so
who could say with those other guys?
Yeah. So, but I will vouch for us. If you don't have any other closing thoughts, are there any recommendations that you might give for people who maybe in similar roles or who are now become responsible for security for an organization, that they should be like some big picture things that they should be thinking about?
There is an organization called SANS, SANS. They put out something called the top 20 security controls. I think they call it the critical security controls, actually. And what I found is I like those because they're in priority order. So you should kind of be able to address number one before you do number two, and so on through the 20.
There's a joke there.
Yeah. And then the other nice thing is that I think it really covers a lot of the capabilities of a matured IT group. So I think if the IT group can meet those 20 controls, then they're probably in a good place to meet the expectations of an organization, that what the organization is expecting them to do. What might be left at that point is to make sure that they have good relationships with the business, good contacts, people who are proactive with coming forward with concerns, or security staff that are personable and able to go out and talk to the business and understand what their concerns are, and fine-tune those critical security controls implemented there. I think that's kind of like a good cheat sheet. Not to say that they're all easy to do. Some of them could be quite difficult to implement, but I think it's a good roadmap to success.
So looking to the future, I just wanted to ask you, how much of a greater risk do you think machine learning poses in terms of enabling attackers to just create super sophisticated campaigns that are, essentially unstoppable, come at you from a million different angles, pose as a million different actors until they find your crack and get in.
Yep.
How much of a risk do you see this?
I think that's a notable risk that security professionals and businesses are going to need to keep on top of. We've already seen malware that can automatically morph into something else depending on an AV's capability. So when I think about AI, I think about an even greater ability there, right? You don't need the coder or the developer to morph the code. It will do it by itself. I think that's pretty notable. And then when you think about the more and more of the devices that are internet accessible, that also is a risk we all need to take care of or consider. We're putting more and more consumer grade products on the internet. Our cars are often connected. Our refrigerators can be connected. Back in the day when I started building networks, we could see attacks on our company being launched from a printer. So if that was able to happen,
printers
then
are evil, though.
They are.
There's never been a good printer.
Never. Yeah. No, never.
I used to work for a laser printer company, so easy.
Oh, I'm sorry.
2-3 years ago, there was a huge DDoS attack that took down like half the internet. I have this in a presentation somewhere, just can't remember it.
Yep.
But it is basically someone took over, I think it was like all the traffic lights, like 10,000 traffic lights. And it's because stupid things like all these, some of these IoT-ish like devices that are out there, a lot of times when they're set up, they all have the same like password 1234. Yep. And so, and because the firmware is burned once and they're not always, now I think we're better at it, that you can update, firmware and such much more easily. But it was like, if you knew the password to one, you knew for all of them, and you're able to kind of take those over. And I think that, to your point, like now the surface area of the threat is way larger than it's ever been, and it's probably only going to increase.
Right. And the bad thing for us as security professionals is we sort of have to be aware of everything. We have to know where all of the cracks in the organization are, and the attacker only has to find that one.
Right.
And I also wonder about culpability when I think about this stuff too, and with machine learning. Like if it's no longer a person that's modifying the code, but it's actually the code that's modifying itself. And at what point does that original author lose culpability, and then anything's possible?
Well, I mean, that guy probably or gal probably is at the next company anyways, and by the time something goes wrong, they're on their second or third job since. So,
or
you're
what
not catching them.
What happens when the NSA publishes a tool and that tool gets hacked and released into the community, and it's automatically morphing? What if we get there? Right. What if we had Stuxnet, which was our first attack that we saw that actually impacted hardware as opposed to just software? What if we were able to see more malware that can automatically morph into something that actually destroyed hardware too? That's interesting.
So Stuxnet was used in Iran on the centrifuges, right?
Yeah.
Well, this has been a great conversation, Jason. I appreciate the time.
Yeah,
Anytime. It was a fun conversation.
Thanks for having me, guys, today.
Thanks, man.
I enjoyed it.
And thank you for tuning in to another episode of The Modern Digital Enterprise, formerly Device Squad, the digital transformation podcast from Anexinet. All right, bye-bye, everybody. Glenn Gruber, senior strategist, is also joining us today on the podcast. Hey, I'm gonna edit that in earlier.
Hey, Glenn, glad you could make it today.
Hey, yeah, thanks. It was really nice to meet you.
Yeah, you too. I look forward to our conversation today.
Oh, holy God!
All right, you're giving it away now. You gave away all my secrets. What I do is I do the answers first, and then I re-record my questions later to make me seem much smarter. All right.
Oh, nice.